Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be invisible in your own family? To have your achievements dismissed and your dreams mocked? What would you do if the people who should love you most treated you like a burden? How far would you go to prove your worth to those who refuse to see it? My name is Carmen, and at 22, I thought I understood my place in this world. I was wrong about everything. The California sun blazed mercilessly as I stepped out of the taxi in front of Hotel Miramar, its pristine white facade gleaming like a crown jewel against the azure Pacific. This was supposed to be our annual family reunion, a tradition I had dreaded for years but never dared to skip. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was standing in front of what would soon become the center of the biggest revelation of my life. I adjusted my simple black dress, deliberately chosen to avoid drawing attention. My mother had always criticized my appearance, claiming I dressed too extravagantly for someone with my modest graphic design income. Today, I wanted to blend into the background, to observe rather than be observed. Little did I know that this reunion would change everything forever. The hotel manager, a distinguished man named Miguel, approached me with a knowing smile that made my stomach flutter with nervousness. There was something in his eyes, a recognition that seemed almost conspiratorial. He greeted me warmly, too warmly for a stranger, and I wondered if my grandfather had mentioned me to the staff during his frequent stays here. My mother Isabella arrived moments later, her silver hair perfectly styled and her designer dress screaming wealth and status. Behind her walked my sister Lucia, 25 and radiant with the confidence of someone who had never known failure. Her husband Robert followed, his calculating eyes scanning the hotel lobby like a predator evaluating territory. The contrast in their greetings was stark and familiar. Lucia received enthusiastic hugs and excited questions about her latest business ventures, while I got a perfunctory nod and a comment about how thin I looked. My mother's disapproval radiated from her like heat from asphalt, and I felt myself shrinking back into the old patterns of trying to be invisible. After that, Robert decided to establish the pecking order with his usual charm. He asked about my graphic design work with the tone of someone inquiring about a child's finger painting. When I mentioned a recent project, he laughed and suggested I consider something more practical, perhaps retail or food service. My mother nodded approvingly at his suggestion, as if my creative career was nothing more than an extended phase I needed to outgrow. The room assignments were the final insult. Lucia and Robert were given the penthouse suite, while I was relegated to room 108, a cramped space near the service elevator where the constant noise of housekeeping carts and delivery trucks would ensure I got little sleep. My mother explained this arrangement matter-of-factly, saying it was only appropriate since Lucia could actually afford such accommodations, while I should be grateful for any room at all. Standing in that dingy room, listening to the ice machine groan to life next door, I wondered for the 1,000th time why I continued to subject myself to this treatment. The answer, as always, was hope. The foolish, persistent hope that someday they might see me differently, might value me for who I was rather than dismiss me for who I wasn't. The next day brought our traditional family dinner, an elaborate affair in the hotel's finest restaurant. I arrived early, hoping to claim a decent seat, only to find myself relegated to the far end of the table, where the conversation would flow around me rather than include me. The symbolism was perfect and painful. I ordered a simple salad, partly because I genuinely preferred it, and partly because I knew it would reinforce their perception of me as someone with limited means. My father, who had been mostly silent since arriving, chose this moment to ask loudly if I could afford anything more substantial. The question hung in the air like smoke, drawing uncomfortable glances from other diners. Meanwhile, the head chef, a renowned culinary artist named Antonio, approached our table to personally greet the guests. When he reached me, his face lit up with genuine warmth, and he began speaking about menu innovations and sustainable sourcing. My family watched this interaction with growing confusion and irritation, unable to understand why such an important person would waste time chatting with their disappointment of a daughter. The tension reached a breaking point when Lucia interrupted our conversation to ask why I was bothering the chef with questions about food I couldn't afford to order anyway. Her words cut deep, not just because of their cruelty, but because of the casual way she delivered them, as if stating an obvious fact rather than delivering a deliberate insult. After that humiliating dinner, I retreated to explore the hotel, needing space to breathe and think. My wandering led me to an area marked as private, where a familiar door stood slightly ajar. It was my grandfather's old office, preserved exactly as he had left it 6 months ago when he passed away. The hotel staff had kept it as a memorial, and somehow I felt drawn to enter. Inside, I found myself surrounded by memories and mysteries. My grandfather had been the only family member who ever believed in me, who saw potential where others saw problems. As I sat in his leather chair, running my hands over papers he had touched, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in his desk drawer was a letter in my mother's handwriting, dated just 2 months before his death. In it, she argued passionately against leaving me any inheritance, claiming I was too immature and irresponsible to handle money or property. She suggested that Lucia would be a much better choice to carry on the family legacy, being successful and married to a businessman who understood investments. The letter went on to detail my supposed character flaws and financial irresponsibility, painting a picture of someone who would squander any inheritance on frivolous pursuits. Reading my mother's words, seeing how thoroughly she had poisoned my grandfather's last months with doubts about my character, I felt something break inside me. This wasn't just favoritism or disappointment. This was active sabotage. The next morning brought more revelations when I encountered Javier, a young cousin I barely knew, near the office. He seemed surprised to see me there, and mentioned casually that Robert had been asking a lot of questions about the hotel's ownership and potential sale value. Apparently, he had been making inquiries about purchasing the property at a significant discount, claiming the family needed to liquidate assets quickly due to tax complications. These pieces of information swirled in my mind as I prepared for the evening's gala, the centerpiece of our reunion weekend. I had brought one nice dress for this occasion, but looking at it hanging in my shabby room, I felt overwhelmed by the futility of trying to compete with Lucia's designer wardrobe and natural elegance. I arrived at the gala fashionably late, not by choice but because I had spent an hour in my room gathering the courage to face another evening of subtle humiliation. The ballroom was magnificent, filled with crystalline light and the soft murmur of sophisticated conversation. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine belonging in this world of wealth and refinement. My father's sharp voice cut through my reverie as he demanded to know why I had been in grandfather's office. His tone suggested I had been somewhere forbidden, doing something shameful. Before I could answer, Miguel appeared at my elbow carrying an expensive bottle of wine, asking if this was the vintage I had requested for the evening. The question hung in the air like a challenge. My mother's eyes narrowed as she calculated the cost of such a bottle, clearly wondering how I could possibly afford it. This was my moment. The fork in the road where I could either retreat into familiar apologies and explanations or step forward into an unknown future. The truth came tumbling out in a rush that surprised even me. I told them about my graphic design company, about the contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, about the clients who valued my creativity and paid premium prices for my work. I explained that I had been deliberately hiding my success, wearing simple clothes and ordering modest meals, because I wanted to see how they would treat me when they thought I had nothing. My mother's reaction was swift and vicious. She accused me of lying, of creating fantasies to make myself feel important. Lucia joined in, suggesting I was having some kind of breakdown, that the stress of being unsuccessful had finally caused me to lose touch with reality. Their disbelief was so complete, so absolute, that I almost began to doubt myself. After that devastating confrontation, I excused myself and retreated to my grandfather's office once more. Alone in the quiet space, surrounded by his books and photographs, I made a decision that would change everything. I picked up the phone and made a call that had been 6 months in the making. The next morning, I requested a family meeting in the hotel's main conference room. My relatives arrived looking annoyed and slightly hungover, clearly expecting another scene or perhaps an apology for my behavior the night before. Miguel was there, along with Arturo Mendez, the family lawyer, and a woman I introduced as Sarah Chen, my business attorney. I began by acknowledging their disbelief about my success and their assumption that I was either lying or delusional. Then I activated the room's projection system and began showing them documentation that told a very different story. Bank statements, client contracts, business registrations, and tax returns painted a picture of a young woman who had built a thriving company while her family dismissed her as a failure. Meanwhile, the real bombshell was yet to come. I revealed that my grandfather had indeed left me an inheritance, one that my mother's interference had delayed but not prevented. The inheritance wasn't money or stocks or jewelry. It was Hotel Miramar itself, along with 2 other properties and a trust fund worth several $1,000,000. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. I watched my family's faces as they processed this information, seeing confusion give way to shock and then to a kind of desperate calculation. Lucia was the first to recover, immediately asking why I hadn't mentioned this earlier and suggesting we could all work together to manage these assets as a family. After that, I shared the letter I had found in grandfather's desk, reading aloud my mother's attempts to poison him against me. I explained how Robert's inquiries about purchasing the hotel had been motivated not by family loyalty, but by inside information about its true ownership. The web of deception and manipulation became clear as I laid out the evidence methodically and without emotion. The confrontation that followed was uglier than anything I had imagined. My mother broke down completely, admitting that she had always resented my grandfather's favoritism toward me and had seen his death as an opportunity to finally put me in what she considered my proper place. Lucia accused me of being vindictive and manipulative, of setting them up for this humiliation. Robert's reaction was the most telling. Instead of apologizing or expressing remorse, he immediately began calculating how this new information might benefit him. He suggested ways we could work together, how his business expertise could help me manage my newfound wealth. Even in defeat, he couldn't stop scheming. The next few hours were a blur of lawyers and paperwork, of signatures and official transfers that had been delayed for months by my mother's interference. By evening, I was officially the owner of the hotel where my family had just spent the weekend humiliating me. The irony was exquisite and bitter. I didn't throw them out, though part of me wanted to. Instead, I offered them a choice. They could accept the new reality and work toward rebuilding our relationships on more honest terms, or they could leave, and we could have minimal contact going forward. I made it clear that the days of treating me as the family disappointment were over, regardless of their choice. 1 year later, as I stood in the penthouse suite that was now truly mine, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The hotel was thriving under my ownership, my design company was expanding internationally, and most importantly, I had learned to value myself regardless of my family's opinion. My relationship with them had evolved in ways I never expected. My mother was slowly learning to see me as an adult worthy of respect rather than a child to be managed. Lucia had started her own business rather than relying on family connections, and we were building a relationship based on mutual accomplishment rather than comparison. Robert had learned the hardest lesson of all. His schemes and manipulations had cost him not just financial opportunity but also his marriage to Lucia, who had finally seen him clearly once his true nature was revealed. He was starting over from nothing, which perhaps was exactly what he needed. Standing at my window, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't the money or the property or even the vindication. It was the knowledge that I had finally learned to stand up for myself, to demand the respect I deserved, and to build a life based on my own values rather than their expectations. The girl who had arrived at this hotel a year ago, desperate for acceptance and willing to endure any humiliation to get it, was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who understood that true success isn't measured by others' approval but by your own sense of worth and accomplishment. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to stop accepting less than you deserve. It took me 22 years to learn that lesson, but now that I would never forget it again.